Good morning, and hope you're enjoying the 2020 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference Competitive Advantage Talks presented by Kraft Analytics Group. My name is Dan Ford, and I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. It is my pleasure to introduce our next presentation, Intangibles, Unlocking the Science and Soul of Team Chemistry. With that, please join me in welcoming our speaker to the stage, Joan Ryan, journalist and San Francisco Giants media consultant.
Thanks, Dan. I know this mic isn't on, but just because it's here, I feel like I have to have it here. Good morning, everyone. Really happy to be here. So I think I'm going to have a little bit of a different presentation than the ones I've been watching yesterday and today. So stick with me when I start, and it sounds like I'm not talking about sports or analytics. So when my mother died suddenly at the age of 76, she and my father had been married 55 years. My father was about 79 at the time, and he had some minor back problems and lapses in memory, but he was pretty healthy. Soon, he was hardly eating. He was flummoxed by the telephone and, wow, that's loud, flummoxed by the telephone and the remote control, and doctors couldn't find anything wrong. And 9 months after my mother died, my father did. Cause of death was failure to thrive. Now, I had heard that term only in connection to babies, and specifically to babies at the turn of the last century in sterile, so-called sterile orphanages. It's funny how you just kind of look at that screen as if by pointing at the screen it's going to change. So in the turn of the last century, to stop the spread of disease, caretakers were told not to touch the babies except to bathe them, change them, and clothe them. Soon the babies were eating less. They were lethargic. Death rates in these orphanages skyrocketed to like 75%. In one orphanage, every baby died. The babies who did survive were almost always cognitively impaired. So it wasn't until the 1940s with a physician, Austrian-American physician named René Spitz, did we discover that babies need more than food and water and cleanliness to survive. They need connection. They need touch and eye contact. They need to mimic faces and voices. They need another person's body rhythm to regulate their own. And many, many studies since then have backed this up. At the time of my father's unexpected death, I was deep into researching the phenomenon of team chemistry. The idea had been triggered a few years earlier at the 20th anniversary of the 1989 Giants. Baseball team. I was a youngish sports columnist in 1989 and had recently moved to San Francisco from Florida, where we didn't have any major league teams yet. So I was fascinated by this total junk drawer of a team that I walked into in San Francisco, rife with fissures and fault lines that really should have cracked that clubhouse wide open. It was the hard-drinking carousers and the born-again Christians, the African Americans and Southern whites, Latin players from 3 different countries, college guys and the functional illiterates, youngsters jockeying for roster spots, and fading veterans trying to hold on. They fought and they judged, they joked, they hung out, and they loved each other openly and without reservation. They knew each other so well, one of the players told me, that, quote, you can sit down in the shitter and look at the feet next to you in the stall and know who it is. They won the National League pennant for the first time in 27 years. Though, if anyone remembers that '89 World Series, the mighty Oakland A's and the real fissures and fault lines of a 6.9 earthquake brought their dream season to an end. So now I'm at the reunion in this party tent, and I'm watching these now middle-aged guys hugging and laughing and skewering each other like no time had passed at all. And I could hear in their voices and see on their faces what I had 2 decades earlier. They still loved each other. And as I'm listening to their conversations, I hear the guys saying over and over, it was the best team chemistry team they had ever been on, before or after. Now, team chemistry is this term we toss around a lot in sports. Okay, I've got to do this again. And there's a huge range of opinions. Oh, I was supposed to do that earlier, sorry. So we have this. The contribution of chemistry is easily the biggest hype in sports. And we have this from Tony La Russa. Every once in a while, you hear an expert that says, team chemistry is overrated. You just write that person off. It occurred to me that I had never really stopped to think what team chemistry was, or even if it really existed. Was it just a label we slapped on every overachieving, fun-loving team that won? And that hung out together and had, pick one, beards, matching hairstyles, or some sort of crazy hand gestures, if anybody remembers the Texas Rangers and the claw and antlers. I also wondered, well, what about teams like the A's and the Yankees of the 1970s? The so-called 25 players, 25 cabs teams. Oh, I really don't like PowerPoint. They could barely get through an afternoon without a fist fight, yet they won championship after championship. They seemed to play just fine without chemistry. And what about good chemistry teams that don't win? It's hard to make a case that chemistry was any kind of factor at all. So as I drove home from that reunion, I couldn't shake the idea, though, that 89 team and a lot that I had covered in my nearly 3 decades of covering sports, they seemed to have something. And thus began for me a nearly 10-year obsession to answer 3 questions. Does chemistry exist? If it exists, what is it? And finally, how does it affect performance? Because why even talk about it if it doesn't affect performance? So I talked to sports executives, baseball ops analysts, players, coaches, scientists. I read research papers, 30 books. Eventually I had 150 interviews and, a mountain of research papers and books. So I had all this great information, but I still didn't have that underlying foundation that held all the pieces together. So now back to my father. The circumstances of his death, 5 years after that reunion, got me thinking in my chemistry-obsessed brain, if a person can be so profoundly affected by another human being that he can actually die from her absence, and if babies die simply from lack of physical and emotional connection, then it seemed logical that all human beings have the capacity to physiologically affect and be affected by those around them. This, I thought, could be the foundation I was looking for, that team chemistry was a biological construct. Not long after that, I came across a book written by a psychiatrist neuroscientist named Thomas Lewis. The book included this mind-blowing sentence: "No human is a functioning whole on his own. Each has open loops that only somebody else can complete." I knew I had to talk to this guy. So I met him at his office, 2 doors down from the No Name Bar in Sausalito, California. I told him I understood open loops in the extreme, like with my father and the orphaned babies, but how might it work in sports or even just in our everyday life? So we talked about how humans have the largest brain relative to body size of any animal on Earth. It quadrupled in size over 3 million years. And it wasn't so much to house our intellect, but to house all of our social wiring. Our survival, as we know, depended on us being connected to each other in very connected tribes. So today, as then, our brains gather signals from everyone around us. facial expressions, tone of voice, body language. We react by altering not only our own facial expressions, voice, body language, but our heart rate, our hormones, metabolism, 1,000 tiny recalibrations every moment, each of us influencing one another with such speed and subtlety that we barely notice. Everything about another person is contagious, Dr. Lewis told me. A part of who you are in the moment comes from who the other person is. He said, for example, you might notice that you're funnier when you're around a particular person, or maybe you're softer when you're around that person. I said, so they're tapping into something already in me. And he shook his head. He said, there really isn't a you in the way you think there is. There is only you in relationship. A part of you is always supplied by other people. I had to wrap my brain around that, but I knew he was right. I'm not naturally a funny person, but around this one friend, I am genuinely funny. When I thought about it, I realized that the Joan I am with my brothers and sisters in Florida is different from the Joan I am with my friends in San Francisco. And certainly the Joan I am with my husband is different from the Joan I am with anyone else. So we know that short of solitary confinement, there's no escaping the influence other people have on every aspect of our lives. So why would it be any different inside a sports locker room? As we all know, during the season, players spend more time with each other than they do with their families and friends. They're influencing each other's energy, moods, mindsets, everything, virtually every moment. The nature of these influences is really the raw material of team chemistry. And some players have more impact on teammates than others. And a select few have a profound impact on their teammates. And I call these players super carriers of chemistry, super carriers. So I present to you now the curious case of Jonny Gomes. 18th round draft pick, journeyman outfielder, lifetime batting average of .242, bounced around the league for 11 years. But over those years, a pattern began to emerge. His teams won. With Tampa Bay in 2008, after a decade of mostly last place finishes, the Rays reached the World Series for the first time in franchise history. His 2010 Cincinnati Reds reached the World Series for the first time in 15 years. His 2012 Oakland A's, predicted to lose 100 games, shocked the baseball world by winning 94 and the American League West. His 2015 Kansas City Royals won the World Series. But since we're in Boston, the Jonny Gomes story I'm going to tell is about the 2013 Red Sox. So they're playing St. Louis in the World Series. It's a few hours before Game 4. The Cardinals are ahead in the series 2-1. Red Sox manager John Farrell posts his lineup. And as always, the lineup goes out to all the media outlets and posted on social media. Daniel Nava is starting in left field, which is expected. Nava and Gomes had platooned all season. Left-handed Nava playing against right-handed pitchers and vice versa. So the Cardinals had right-hander Lance Lynn on the mound in Game 4, so Nava was in the lineup. The Red Sox clubhouse leaders got together, Big Papi, John Lester, half a dozen others, Dustin Pedroia. They huddled in the clubhouse, made a decision, and went into John Farrell's office as a group. Jonny Gomes is playing, they told the manager. Now, of course, Farrell balked at what seemed like a ridiculous request. Managers don't just change the lineup hours before a game, especially a World Series game, unless there's a really good reason. And plus, Daniel Nava, if you remember, was having a great year that year. He batted .303 during the regular season, a career best, compared to Jonny Gomes's .247. More important, Gomes had yet to get a hit in the series. He'd been awful, even against lefties. But his teammates wouldn't budge. They had lost games 2 and 3, and another loss, and they'd be 1 game away from losing the series. The leaders on the team believed that they played better with Jonny Gomes in the lineup. Faced with really what amounted to a mutiny, Farrell changed the lineup. He put Gomes in left, he moved Nava to right, and he scratched the regular right fielder, Shane Victorino. And shortly before the game, the Red Sox announced Victorino had developed lower back tightness. So, Gomes is 0 for the series when he comes up to bat in the 6th inning. 2 outs, 2 men on. The game is tied 1-1. He hits a 3-run homer with Pedroia and Ortiz on base, and they win 4-2. They go on to take the next 2 games and win the championship. Gomes hit 142 for the postseason, but the numbers his teammates will remember. The Red Sox were 10-1 during the postseason when Gomes was in the lineup. Now, of course, Gomes might just be baseball's Forrest Gump, a guy with the extraordinarily good fortune to be in the right place at the right time over and over. I mean, really, was there any actual evidence that he made a difference? I took the question to a UC San Francisco neuroscientist named Josh Woolley. He studies the physiological power of social connection. He said he found my question confusing. He said it made no sense that we continually question the truth of our own actual experiences. Did Gomes' teammates perform better? And I said, well, yeah, it looked like it. Did they win? Yeah, they did win. He said the player's actual experience is the real evidence. And I said, no, like scientific evidence. Maybe the players just believed Gomes had improved their performance. And now he started to get a little exasperated with me. He said their belief did improve their performance. In medicine, when a patient believes a pill will ease her pain, it often does, no matter what is actually in the pill. Placebos trigger very real physiological responses in our brains. Our expectation of pain relief awakens the pain relief system in our brain. He said a team's belief in a particular player has a similar biological effect. This is a real phenomenon, he said. It's in the brain, it's a real thing, it happens, it affects performance. And it got me thinking about the yips. It's a word we first associate with golfers who suddenly can't putt. And we see it in baseball. If you remember John Lester, Steve Sachs, several others, suddenly couldn't throw to first base. Rick Ankiel couldn't get a pitch over the plate. We all understand that the yips are all in the athlete's head. There's nothing wrong with their arms. Their minds get a hold of a belief, and their bodies go right along with it. Yet, some of the same people who accept that the yips are real don't accept that the opposite must also be true, that belief can elevate a performance. But it's not only a belief in a teammate that lifts performance, it's the bond with a teammate. And no entity has studied the impact of these bonds on performance than the military. Modern research supports what has been true for as long as there have been armies. Soldiers don't fight for noble purpose. They fight for each other. For all the flag waving and talk of God and country, that depth of commitment and love is the only thing powerful enough to keep soldiers performing at such a high level under such unbearable stress. This is why SEAL teams train the way they do. There is as much emphasis in their training on bonding and trust as there is on physical fitness and technical skills. In their basic underwater, kind of forgot about that one. There we go. In their basic underwater demolition course, each trainee is assigned a swim buddy. They must go everywhere together, even the dining hall. If you're caught without your swim buddy, another trainee is punished at random for allowing it to happen. That's how important they feel this is. So for my book, I interviewed 4-star General Stanley McChrystal, who spent years running the Department of Defense's super secret black ops and commanded the joint NATO-US Afghanistan mission. What he said was, this is about more than the feel-good effects of bonding. It's done because teams whose members know one another deeply perform better. Any coach knows that these sorts of relationships are vital for success. It's why the DoD commissioned a 3-year study recently on synthetic oxytocin. Real oxytocin is a hormone that is well known for fostering trust and bonding. And the military wants to find out if synthetic oxytocin, which can be administered in a nasal spray, can get soldiers to bond and trust more quickly. And to be sure, trust comes in many forms. And this is what explains those A's and Yankees teams that were so contentious. They had incredible trust, but only on the field. They trusted that their teammates cared as much about winning as they did, and that they were prepared and willing to give full effort. In this way, they had incredible chemistry, but it's what I call task chemistry. It existed only on the field. But most athletes, like soldiers in battle, like human beings in general, need a deeper and more personal connection to care so much and battle so hard. Jake Peavy, who was on that Boston team, Cy Young winner, crystallized this dynamic for me as well as anyone I interviewed. I asked him why team chemistry mattered to his performance. And if you've ever seen Jake Peavy pitch, he's the stomper and the snorter, and he's talking to himself, and he's yelling, and he's just up completely, gives 100%. And I pointed out to him that, Jake, why does chemistry matter to you? Because you're already giving 100%. You can't give more than 100%. And he said, my teammates summon something from me I can't summon for myself. And you remember the open loop. The men on the field completed Jake Peavy's open loop. So day in and day out, on the field and in the workplace, whether we know it or not, we count on other people to stir our emotions, to boost our energy, give us something to fight for. On great team chemistry teams, meaning and purpose evolve beyond winning gold medals or even making history. Your teammates become the meaning and purpose. You feel the joy and exhilaration of being part of a truly connected, focused, driven group. There's a sense of completeness, of being the perfect you in that moment with these exact people in this exact quest. I'll close with a quote from writer Roger Rosenblatt. This was funny. This was from The Onion. Great team chemistry, no match for great team biology. I don't know why I did that. All right, so this is the quote. Magnetic fields, electric currents, the force of gravity all work unseen, as do our interior arbiters of thoughts, inclinations, passions, psyches, tastes, moods, morals, and, if one believes in them, souls. The invisible world governs the visible, like a hidden nation state. Sports teams and businesses once held a clear competitive advantage with analytics. Now that advantage has narrowed because every top team has rooms full of brilliant creative analysts. The new competitive advantage will go to those who figure out ways to recognize, cultivate and harness the power of this hidden nation state we call team chemistry. Thank you for listening, and I welcome your thoughts and your questions. Who has a question? All right, should we wait for the microphone? Where is the microphone? Right there? There you go.
Hi, thank you very much. I don't know if you followed the story in hockey a couple of weeks ago about the emergency backup goaltender who came into a game.
Yeah.
Well, the chemistry-ish finding to that is after the second period, he'd given up a couple of goals.
Right.
They kind of rallied around him, and then the Carolina Hurricanes basically just locked it down for the rest of the game. And it really looked like a good example of that.
Totally.
Until the next few games when
Yeah.
they just came out completely flat after
Exactly.
that. So
Yeah.
in a lot of these cases, these are like adrenaline shots. You get it, it's something
Yep.
that institutes that kind of a change rather than something that's persistent over a
Right.
longer period of time.
Right.
Do you know if there's any, I mean, you gave an example with Jonny Gomes. That team also had David Ortiz, and this is our fucking city with the Boston Strong thing. There was a
Yep.
lot of stuff going around that team as
Yep.
well. Do you have any other ideas about how to identify in the longer term those sorts of presences that are not going to wear off immediately?
Well, I mean, my definition of team chemistry is, this confluence of forces, physiologically, mostly physiologically, but psychologically as well, that elevates performance. So, and it's not a one game. You can't have chemistry just for one game, in my point of view, right? And chemistry does not manufacture talent. So I don't define chemistry as it helps you win. It doesn't help you win. It helps you perform better. So if you have great chemistry, you will be the best mediocre, talented team that you could possibly be. But, you're not going to be the 2013 Red Sox. And I highlight Jonny Gomes, and I say he's a supercarrier because he's an outlier. I mean, there aren't a lot of people like him. And I think, some of us have had that experience in our office place, in our workplace, or you go to a cocktail party and then one person walks in and it's almost like the energy in the room changes. I mean, some of us, not us, meaning me, but some people have that kind of, super influence on others. And if it's positive, wow, what a great thing. I also have in the book about super disruptors as well. And I was telling a couple of people earlier that, of course, I thought Barry Bonds, was the super disruptor of all super disruptors. And I have a chapter about that in the book, which turned out not to be true. After doing all my research, it wasn't true. The real super disruptors, and we've all had these people in our workplace, are the malingerers and the complainers. They are contagious, and you got to get rid of them right when you notice that that's who they are, because they don't change. All right. Other questions? I can't see. Oh, we got to go. Oh, okay. I went on too long. So I will be right outside if anybody would like to talk about team chemistry. Thank you very much.